Chris Grayling joins me now for the Sunday interview. Mr. Grayling, welcome.
Hello there.
We've got a lot to cover, so let me get underway. If you get your way, your own personal way, will the next Tory manifesto include a promise to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights?
It'll contain a promise for radical change to human rights laws. I'm not going to give you the details today because we haven't announced it yet, but I'm very clear. We have to curtail the role of the European Court in the UK. We have to get rid of and replace our Human Rights Act, Labour's Human Rights Act from the late 1990s. We have to make our Supreme Court our Supreme Court. There can be no question of decisions overriding it, in my view, happening elsewhere. And we have to have a situation where our laws contain a balance of rights and responsibilities. People feel very frustrated by the idea that people can always talk about, I know my rights, but they don't seem to believe and accept they have responsibilities.
Well, this is what you told The Spectator last September. It's roughly what you said. Now, I want to see our Supreme Court being supreme again. I think people want to see the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom being in the UK, not Strasbourg. That's clear. But let's be honest here. The Supreme Court cannot be supreme as long as its decisions can be referred to the European Court in Strasbourg.
Well, there's clearly an issue there, and that's something that was raised recently by the immediate past Lord Chief Justice, Lord Judge.
That's true, isn't it?
And that's why we've been working on a very detailed reform plan. We'll publish that in the not-too-distant future, and what we will set out is a direction of travel for a new Conservative government after the next election that will mean wholesale change in this area.
But you already tried to reform the European Court. You had this Brighton Declaration of 2012. Do you accept that reforming the court itself, that's off the table?
Well, there is still a process of reform in the European Court of Human Rights, but my view is it's not going nearly fast enough and not delivering the kind of change we need, and that's why we will bring forward a package that will be dramatically different to that and will set a different track. I'll do it tomorrow, but this is something where we're very clear across the coalition, and we're very open about it, that we have a different view to our colleagues.
But I was just, you cannot be half pregnant on this. Either decisions our Supreme Court takes are subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court, or they're not, in which case we're not part of the European Court.
Indeed, and I hope you'll see when our proposals are packaged, Andrew, brought forward, Andrew, that we've actually come up with a sensible strategy for this country that deals with this issue once and for all.
But can we be part of the Strasbourg Court and yet our Supreme Court be supreme?
Well, that's my point at the start. We have to curtail the role of the court in the UK. That's absolutely clear that that's what we will seek to do. Well, it's what we will do for this country.
Are you but how?
Well, forgive me, I'm not going to announce the package of policies today, but we will go into the next election with a clear strategy that will curtail the role of the European Court of Human Rights in the UK. It's what people want, it's what they expect. Over things like prisoner votes and whether people have whole life tariffs, the decisions have to be taken in Parliament in this country.
Well, are you sure that you've got your own side on this? Look at what the Attorney General, Dominic Reid, said. He said if we were to go down to disengage from the European Court, he says the UK would be a pariah by European standards. It would place us in a group of countries that would make very odd bedfellows indeed. By that he means Belarus.
Well, the question I think I'd be asking in Strasbourg is a different one to that. We had the Secretary-General of the Court in London recently giving evidence to a committee in Parliament in which he described the United Kingdom as being best in class in human rights. Now, if the best in class is saying is enough is enough, then actually somebody over in Strasbourg should be asking, has this all actually gone in the way it should have done? You know, I would love to see wholesale reform in the court tomorrow. I'm not sure it's going to happen.
No.
That's why we'll go into the election with a clear plan for change from this country.
Whatever you have in the manifesto about the European Court, would you want that to be a red line in any coalition agreement?
Well, I'm not going to get into discussion of coalition agreements. My mission is to win the next election with a
Sure, I
majority of
understand
Conservative
that.
government.
You'd have to tell us what your red lines would be.
And forgive me if I don't start planning coalition negotiations this far in advance.
All
We've
right.
been very clear it's an area where we don't agree as parties, but it's also an area where, in my view, the public of this country are overwhelmingly behind the Conservative Party, and it's one reason why I'm sure we can win the next election. 95
Conservative MPs have written to the Prime Minister demanding that he give the Commons the authority to veto any aspect of European Union law. Are you one of the people who wanted to sign that letter but couldn't because you're a minister?
Well, I haven't been asked to sign the letter, and of course I
Would
wouldn't
you
as
have
a
signed
government minister. Look, I think I'm very clear. I think that we need a red card system in Europe for European law. The European Commission has just actually, in my view, treated the first example of a yellow card under the Lisbon Treaty much too dismissively. I'm not convinced my colleagues are going to write. I don't actually think it's realistic to have a situation where one parliament can veto laws across the whole European Union. The Foreign Secretary said that this morning. I understand the concerns of my colleagues, but when we set out to renegotiate our membership, and we've got to deliver real renegotiation, we've also got to have a system that we propose which is viable, and I'm not convinced we can actually have a situation where one parliament could prevent laws happening right across the whole of the European Union.
So you wouldn't have signed that then?
I'm not sure that this is the right approach. I absolutely support the idea of a red card system which allows national parliaments more broadly to say to the European institutions, think again.
All right. Ian Duncan-Smith, your cabinet colleague, has suggested that EU migrants coming to work in this country should have to wait 2 years before they qualify for any welfare benefits. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. I mean, I have to say that I think that there should be an assumption in the way our migration system works, that before you can move from one country to another, before you can start to take back from that country's social security system, you should have made a significant contribution to it. I spent 2.5 years as employment minister working in Brussels to try and get the European Commission to accept the need for change. Many other member states agree with the need for change. There is a groundswell of opinion out there that is absolutely behind Ian in what he's saying. I think we should push for a clear system that says people may be able to move from one country to another to get a job, but actually to move from one country to another to live off the state is simply not acceptable.
Let me go more now to the issue in Giles's films about prisons and sentencing and so on. Now, you're planning a new 2,000 capacity mega prison, 4 other mini prisons. They'll all be run by private firms. Now, given what has happened to the G4S run Oakwood prison, why would you do that?
Well, let's be clear, the new prison in Wrexham, no decisions have been decided on whether it's going to be public or private yet. The question hasn't even been addressed. We've only just got planning permission for it.
Tell us now, what do you think it will be?
I'm not sure yet. I mean, there are strengths and weaknesses in different prisons. There's no clear correlation at all between a public and a private prison over whether there are problems or otherwise. If you take the case of Oakwood, Oakwood's a very well-built prison with excellent facilities. It's in its early stages. It's had teething problems at the start. Actually, the rate of trouble and disturbance in Oakwood is only typical as an average for a prison of its category. It's not a problem prison by comparison with many. And if you take the example of one of our comparators, Park Prison in South Wales, which is a big prison, private-run prison, run by G4S, when it was first launched under the last government, it had teething problems of similar kind to the ones experienced at Oakwood. It's now regarded as one of the best performing prisons in the state.
If that's the case, why wouldn't you give it to a private company then?
Well, I mean, simply a question that we haven't decided yet, and we're only just at the point of getting planning permission for it. So the decisions about operating the prison are a long way from being taken. It's not going to be open for another 3 or 4 years.
Aren't you worried about some of these companies that could be running our prisons? They're under investigation. Some of them have dreadful track records. Are you really sure about this?
Let's be clear. In the case of G4S and Serco, what we've experienced in the last few months has been wholly unacceptable. They have, as a result of what's happened, not been able to go ahead with a number of contracts they might otherwise have got. They are now having to prove to governments that they are fit to resume a position where they can ask to win business from government again. They have paid substantial amounts, or Serco have paid substantial amounts of compensation to the government, to the taxpayer. What has happened is wholly unacceptable, and we have dealt with it extremely robustly.
So why would you give them a 2,000 capacity mega prison?
Well, I said I would.
Or anybody like that?
Well, the fact that we have trouble with 2 companies should not be allowed to say that every company is bad. We haven't actually got to the point in North Wales. We only literally this week got planning permission for it.
In addition to problems at Oakwood, you're quite unique now in your position, is that you've managed to get the barristers out on strike for the first time since history began. What happens if the criminal bar refuses to do work at your new rates of legal aid and the courts grind to a halt? What will you do?
Well, I don't believe that will happen. If you look at this last Monday when the barristers came out on strike, actually 3/4 of Crown courts were operating normally, 93% of magistrates' courts were operating normally, legal cover was provided in police stations. But these are difficult decisions to take. We're having to take difficult decisions across government. I have no desire to cut back legal aid, but we're spending around £2 billion a year on legal aid at the moment, at a time when budgets are becoming tougher and tougher. But I have no choice but to make some changes.
You issued completely misleading figures about what these criminal barristers, not the rich ones doing the civil cases, but these criminal barristers, you said that 25% of them earn over $100,000 a year, but they don't earn that at all. That's their turnover. It includes VAT. 33% of that money goes on their expenses. They have to pay for their own pensions. They have to pay for their own insurance. These are people are not getting wealthy out of doing this work.
Well, Andrew, let's be clear. I don't publish figures, our statisticians do.
Ministry
They
of
put all
Justice.
caveats in place, explaining
They were
the
all in the
situation.
footnotes.
Where you have high-cost cases, very high-cost cases, where we've taken the most difficult decisions, where we've implemented the highest cuts, we have tried hard in taking difficult decisions to focus the impact higher up the income scale rather than lower down the income scale.
Sure.
And that's involved some difficult decisions.
But do you
at higher
accept
levels
that
of income.
their take-home pay is not 100,000? Do you accept that?
I accept that from that they have to take out chambers fees and other costs, though of course some things like travelling to and from court, you and I and everyone else has to pay for travel to and from work. So these things are not
You don't include
exceptional.
VAT in your salary, do you?
Yes, but those figures are net of VAT.
On a week, well, no, the 100,000 figure was not net of VAT.
Well, it depends which of the figures you
I'm
publish.
sure
We've
your own
published our net of
MOJ
VAT.
figures that were not net of VAT.
Well, we've had a variety of figures published, some are net of VAT, some are not. But it is absolutely
Okay,
clear.
these are from your own
But
website.
let's be clear. The gross figures for fees from legal aid payments include 20% VAT. So there's no doubt about that.
On a week when even a cabinet minister can be fitted up by the police, don't we all need well-financed legal aid?
Well, there is no question as a result of these changes that anyone will end up in court undefended unless they have the ability to pay for themselves. We have said that if you're on a six-figure salary, if you have a disposable income after tax, national insurance, housing costs, food, council tax of more than £3,000 a month, you're going to have to pay your own Crown Court costs. And we've said in exceptional circumstances, if you haven't got enough money to pay because of the scale of case, we'll support you anyway. But there is no question of anyone ending up in court facing a criminal charge where they haven't got a lawyer to defend them. That would be wholly wrong.
Let's look at how so many dangerous criminals under your regime managed to avoid jail. Here are the figures up here. This is from 2012. Half the people for sexual assault found guilty, not jailed. Half the people for burglary, not jailed. Half the people for grievous bodily harm, not jailed. I thought you were meant to be tough on crime.
Well, the first thing to say, those figures actually predate my time. But
Yeah,
since
but they're under the
2010,
coalition government.
since 2010, the number of those people going to jail has been increasing steadily. If you put up the figures for 2010 there, you would see a significant change. Now look, we're never going to be in a position where everybody who commits, for example, an act of violence is going to end up in jail. People end up in a bar fight, smack each other on the nose. The courts will often decide it's not appropriate to apply a jail sentence, to give a community sentence. But actually the trend is towards longer sentences and more people going to jail, and that's I think what the public would want.
Well, that may be, but it's even quite hard to get sent to jail if you do a lot of these things again and again. Even habitual criminals have trouble making it. In 2012, one criminal avoided jail despite having more than 300 offences to his name. 36,000 avoided prison despite 15 or more previous offences. Again, I thought you were meant to be
Well, this
tough
is
on crime.
precisely why we've taken steps to start to toughen up the system. Last autumn, for example, we scrapped repeat cautions. One of the things that I found a huge frustration is not only did they not go to jail, but they were getting repeat cautions. You could find people
what do you
getting
think
dozens.
about
Well, as of last autumn, we have scrapped repeat cautions. If you commit the same offence twice within a 2-year period, you will not get a caution, you'll go to court. And that is
Yeah, but you still might end up going to jail.
So, look,
According to these figures, you won't.
more and more people are going to jail. The sentences are getting longer. I cannot just magic up another 30,000 prison places.
That's you haven't got room to put the bad people in jail.
But the courts also will frequently take decisions, and will always, for them to take decisions, not me, that the circumstances of a case, like those two men in a bar fight, actually don't merit a jail sentence. These figures, these statistics, contain a huge basket of offences, from the most minor of offences to the most despicable of offences.
But something has gone wrong
within
if you can do 300 crimes and still not end up.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's why we have started to take real steps to change things. And started with repeat cautions where this can't happen anymore.
The Tories are looking for another 25 billion in cuts after the election. Nick Clegg said this morning that you're going to do all of that, particularly the 12 billion of welfare cuts, on the backs of the poor. He's right, isn't he?
Well, this is the government that has actually provided a huge tax reduction for the poor.
Yeah.
People in the lowest incomes are often now not paying tax at all. It's a government where the rich are paying more as a proportion of tax
I
than they
understand all
ever
that,
have
but these
before.
cuts are going to fall disproportionately on people below average earnings, correct?
Well, let's look, for example, at one of the proposals, which is to limit housing benefit for the under-25s. What we are effectively saying is that in very many cases today, until people are established in work, after they've left college, or after they've left university, or after they've left school, they live at home with their parents. Now, in some cases, children coming out of care, for example, that's not possible. We're clearly going to have to take that into account in what we plan. But we have said there is a strong case for saying that you're not going to get housing benefit, you're not going to get the state to pay for a home for you until you are some years down the road and have properly established yourselves in work.
And by definition, these people are on lower than average earnings. Give me one way in which those on the higher tax bands, the better off, will contribute to this 25 billion in cuts.
Well, they already are. And we have put in place tax changes that means
that
the tax rate today, the highest tax rate, is already higher than it was in every year of the last government. The amount of tax that the Welsh are paying is more than it was in the past.
More for the poor, but no more expected of the rich.
Well, we think that there are limits to how far up you can push the tax burden. We will clearly look at future policy and work out how best to distribute the tax burden in this country. It's not for me to second guess George Osborne's future budget plans. But what we're doing is looking at changes like, for example, housing benefit the under 25s, where we're saying an awful lot of young people in that situation have to live at home with their parents. Is it right for those who are not working for the state to provide accommodation for them?
Chris Grayling, thank you for being with us. All three major parties are